Widen down. I wasn't ready to start. All right, we are going to be in, as we have been every class so far, we're going to be in the book of Proverbs. We are discussing words of wisdom. If this is your first time joining in, we've been doing this a little bit differently, and that just means we've been doing it topically. Proverbs is a great book, but it's kind of hard to do textually. Just go verse by verse. You can do it textually for sure, and you should read it, all in one sitting, chunk by chunk. But that being said, for class purposes and to clear up any confusion we might have, we're going to do this topically. So tonight's topic, we've already gone over godly fear. Last week we went over friendship. This evening we're going to be discussing integrity. Integrity, and Proverbs has a lot to say about integrity. Before we dive into some examples, and we will leave the book of Proverbs tonight a little bit, but we are going to look at some examples of integrity. But first, we have to define integrity. So would anyone like to give it a good old college try and tell me what your definition of integrity might be? Keeping your word, being honest in both speech and in your behavior. When I think of integrity, the first thing that my mind goes to is business. You want to be known for being a honest business person, because that really carries. That really travels a long way. If you are a business owner or you've ever worked retail or something like that, if you knowingly sold someone a product that was damaged or, defective, that's going to come back to haunt you eventually. Not to talk ill of used car salesmen, but we always have, you know what I'm saying? Everybody's like, yeah, he's kind of a used car salesman, because we associate that with a lack of integrity sometimes, which we shouldn't, because I know some very honest used car salesmen. I was actually telling the kids a story about that the other day in class. We were talking about, why is it important to be a Christian and to keep watch on yourself, was what we were actually discussing out of 1 Timothy. And I gave this example, but at the last congregation I worked at, we had a couple there who owned a car dealership. And I went down there one day because I was going to look at getting a new truck. Now, I'm a Chevy man, bow tie till I die. Fords, you can keep it. Dodge, you can keep it. But I was open to looking at things. So I'm walking through the parking lot with this member of the church who owns the car dealership, and I get to a Dodge, and I said, "Now, what year is that?" And she goes, "I'm not even going to let you look at it." I was like, "Well, you own it." She goes, "Well, just keep walking." It's like, hey, that's honest. Now, somebody probably did buy that Dodge. To them, buyer beware. But when you think of integrity, I think of business. But of course, it is our speech. It is the way we carry ourselves. And it matters. It matters a lot. It matters with our relationship with one another. It matters with our relationship with God. And as faithful members of the church, it really matters with how the world views us. If we are known for being, unethical in our actions and our dealings and our behavior, a lot of people will unfortunately judge the church as a whole based on our behavior. I've heard that many times in studies that, I've been around those Church of Christ people. Okay, you're painting with a broad brush right out of the gate. They really have a problem with lying, or they really have a problem with judging others. I'm like, well, hey, wait a second. We got to, look at this individually. But the integrity or lack thereof of some has for sure not been positive for the view of the church from the world's perspective. All right, so what is integrity? Number one, let's go to Proverbs chapter 22. Proverb 22. And as we said, we will get into a couple of different books tonight. Proverb 22 and verse number 1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. So having integrity behind your name matters greatly. Again, going back to the idea of business, my grandfather on my dad's side has been a general contractor and a builder forever. His dad, who was born in 1917, was a brick mason until he died. And my dad was a general contractor for many, many years. So I come from generations of builders. One thing that's associated with my grandfather is when you hear the last name Hackney in his part of Georgia, you do business with him because he's always known as being an honest person. And that matters greatly because all you have is your name. Because especially in the business world, because if you are known for doing poor business or, doing a shoddy job at someone's, home, that's really going to affect your bottom line. And people aren't going to want to do business with you. So in this case, a good name is better than riches because if you have riches and not a good name, it doesn't really matter much. Now let's go to another book penned by Solomon, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse number 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse number 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, the day of death than the day of birth. So it's better than precious ointment. It's better than great riches, silver and gold. Now I've added on there 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse number 2. That's the qualifications of elders. And it talks about an elder needs to be blameless. Now, I've heard some people misunderstand what it means to be blameless. Blameless is not perfect. Blameless is not flawless. There's no such thing as completely flawless. But what does it mean? It means that they need to have a good name. They need to be known as being people of integrity. Okay? One of my teachers, while I was in school, gave me this example. Gave it to the entire class, but he said when he first started preaching, and this was a long time ago, I won't mention the teacher's name, but he said when he first started preaching, they had started a congregation and they rented a room on the second story of a building. And he said underneath the building was a bar. So it's pretty interesting that you have a church over a bar in this one little building in the town. He said one day he went up there to try to get into the building because he was going to study or whatnot, and the door was locked. But he knew that the people down there at the bar had an extra key. He said he went down there, got the key from the bar, went back outside, and he said as soon as he stepped out on the street with a key in his hand from the bar, there was a church member standing there on the sidewalk just looking at him. And he said before he could even explain, he goes, I bet you forgot the key, didn't you? You forgot the key and had to get it from them. I know you weren't in there doing what, people do in bars. And he used that as an example because in that case, his integrity shined through. People knew him. They knew his name. They knew his behavior. If you heard something ill about brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, they should have the type of integrity that makes you say, let's get all the facts. Let's make sure that's true because I don't know. I know them pretty well. And they seem to be pretty honest people. So, yes, ma'am.
We are supposed to think the best of our brothers and sisters.
We are.
So if we would see that, we should assume the best. And then if it really is something you're concerned about, speak to them.
Right. And
not other people.
And hey, that's a good point. Let's talk about that for a minute. How am I supposed to speak to my brethren? Is there a formula for how I'm supposed to address issues? Yes. I'm supposed to go to them first. Matthew chapter 18, alone. Alone. Not Facebook. not social media. Not tell everybody that I know first and then address it. No, I'm supposed to address my brother or sister directly. And then if that doesn't work, then what am I supposed to do? Two or three witnesses. That has always been the case. When you brought legal issues before a judge, even in the Old Testament, you always had to have 2 or 3 witnesses there to make something official. If they don't listen to 2 or 3 witnesses, then you move to the next step, which is to talk to the congregation. And the congregation's job at that point is to plead with them to fix whatever error is in their life. Another one of my teachers, when we were going over that text in Matthew chapter 18, he said, boys, you've never seen this done correctly. You have never seen that done correctly in the church. He said, let me tell you what one congregation did where I worshiped. It was somewhere up in Pennsylvania. They had a man that was living in open sin. Think of something similar along the lines of 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And they said, they went to talk to him. They went to talk to him, with a couple witnesses. They finally told the congregation, and they said on a Sunday night after church, the entire congregation loaded up in their cars, and they drove to his house, and they stood in his yard. They knocked on his door, and they said, please come back. And that sounds so radical. Please don't stand in my yard. Please don't stand in my yard. But the point is that should be the mindset behind it. I'm trying to win you back. Okay, we've misunderstood the purpose behind church discipline. I don't know why we're talking about church discipline right now, because we're talking about integrity right now. But I love it. I love it. I was just telling the elders a minute ago, I was like, I'm having fun. Just roll with it. Let's go. But we have misunderstood the purpose of church discipline forever. What is the purpose? To win their souls back. That's the reason. It's not to shame them. Of course, shame is a part of the process, but your goal is the first time we have this discussion and say, hey, we're going to have to ask you to withdraw yourself. The whole attitude should be love for your soul. Again, sounds crazy to stand in somebody's yard as an entire congregation, but that's the mindset. The mindset should be, we're hurting because of this. Not, oh, so-and-so, did something wrong and we're gonna really take them to task on this. We should have care for the soul as the driving factor. Yes. And one thing, I don't even know if I really want to open this can of worms. Let's go. One of my very, very, very best friends. I mentioned him a couple weeks ago. I've had the two same best friends since third grade. One of them is a fellow minister. We all were raised in the church. We were all going to the same camps, same classes. We knew the truth. He now claims to be an atheist, one of the two friends of mine. And he attributes that to some bad experiences with the church. One of which is he was raised by a father who was less than perfect. He was an alcoholic and used to be a member of the church and left the church. When he was in high school at some point, he was probably 17, maybe 18, out of the blue. His father had not been to a service his entire life. Really, since he was a baby. Out of the blue, the local congregation where he and his mother and his siblings worship decided they were going to withdraw from the father, randomly. They've had no contact with the father for 15 years, at least 15 years. The family wasn't aware of it. They found a letter that was written to this man, sent via USPS, in the father's sock drawer, and it just simply said, you are being withdrawn from. If you do not show up at this date and repent, don't ever talk to us again. Does that look anything like church discipline? No. That is not the example of Matthew 18 when a brother has fault or sin. That is not the example of 1 Corinthians chapter 5. That is not biblical. And of course, that upset the family greatly. And I wish he was a stronger Christian at the time and could kind of work through that and understand that some people make poor decisions. But eventually it just turned into resentment. And that's what he attributes his lack of belief now to some bad experiences. So we need to be very careful with how we talk about this subject and handle this subject. And this subject should be handled because we have to have church discipline. I had an elder tell me one time that not here. I had an elder explain to me that church discipline just doesn't work anymore and it's outdated. And, that's why their congregation, we don't discipline like that because it doesn't work. Why would God give us instructions for something that doesn't work? The problem is it's not been handled the way God told us to handle it. Now, integrity. Point number next. So sorry we got off on that. But I'm glad we did, though. That's interesting. But please understand, I'm not trying to, be nihilistic or be negative when we talk about that subject. I just want us to have more biblical understanding of that subject when it comes up. We have two.
When you talk about integrity and church discipline, it should go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, really, I don't chase rabbits for nothing. I was there the whole time.
Yes, later in the chapter, verse 17, when it talks about they are to have the report without, is that outside the church or outside?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they need to be thought of well. One section of Scripture that I was thinking about putting in here is Proverbs chapter 31. Because when you're talking about this woman who is the virtuous woman, it talks about how she is, she's doing business, her husband's doing business, and he is known at the gates of the city. They're known around the community as being integral people. So that's a really good point, yes. Anything else before we move on to the very first thing we need to talk about? All right, point number 2, Proverbs chapter 4. So we'll backtrack a little bit. Proverbs chapter 4. And let's look at verses 24 through 27. And then we'll go to chapter 12 and chapter 19. Proverbs 4, 24 through 27. Put away from you crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the paths of your feet, and then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. So to this point, it is more than just words, but it's words mixed with actions. I want you to look there at verse 26. Ponder the paths of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. It is a way of life, which we'll get into in just a minute, but it's not just the right words. He does mention your speech, but it's also words mixed with action. Let's look at chapter 12 rather, verse number 19, and then we'll go to chapter 19. Chapter 12, verse number 19, speaking again about words. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is for a moment. Drop down to verse 22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are His delight. Chapter 19 and verse number 1. Better is a poor person who walks in integrity, there's the action, than one who is crooked in speech. The one who is crooked in speech is a fool. Into verse 1. So we see in all these texts we have speech, we have action. It's pairing the two together. We do need to be people of our word, but we also need to match our words with our actions. That's part of being someone who has integrity. So, number 1, what is integrity? It's having a good name. Number 2, it's pairing that good name with good actions and good words. Back it up. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk, right? Number 3, it is a way of life. Now, this is not an action, it is a character. So let's go to chapter 11, verses 2 through 4, and then we'll do chapter 20, verse number 7. And then we will shortly get into these examples. I'm very excited about that part. Chapter 11, verse 2 through 4. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with the humble is wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness is delivered from death. He's talking about pride in verse 2. In verse number 4, he talks about riches. So these people are building their life around something. Some people build their life around pride. Other people build their life around integrity. Look at chapter 20 and verse number 7. The righteous who walk in his integrity, blessed are his children after him. So walking in integrity pairs that action. It's a way of life. It's not just a one-time business deal or one-time promise kept or what have you. All right. Any questions, comments, interjections, rebuttals? I know we kind of sped through that, but I was trying to cover some ground. Let's look at some examples of integrity, and I'm very excited about this part. Let's go to Genesis chapter 39. This is one of the best examples you will have of situational integrity with Joseph, Genesis 39. I love the life of Joseph. He lived quite frankly, a brutal life. Things didn't always pan out for him, but that's part of being integral. It is doing the right thing no matter what the outcome is, no matter what you're benefiting from it. A lot of times when you do the right thing, you won't benefit from it financially, or you won't get ahead secularly by doing the right thing. But that's part of being integral, is doing the right thing no matter what. And in this case, we all know this text probably very well, but in Genesis 39, you have Joseph is in Potiphar's house. He has risen to a point where he has been trusted. He is trusted among everybody else. Potiphar trusts this man. Pick up with me in verse number 6. It says, so he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. So Potiphar trusted Joseph with everything he had. Because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. He was not worried about a thing. This is the kind of guy who has so much trust that you can give him the keys to your car, you can give him your bank information, you know it's going to be okay because they have that kind of bond in verse 6. Now, of course, the rest of the story going down through verse 12, start at verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me, but he refused. He said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern. When Joseph first said that phrase, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, what was he concerned about in that phrase? His integrity. I've worked hard at this job. I've put my time in. He trusts me. He has left me with trust. I don't want to break that trust. He has left me in charge. He has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. I have a lot of trust with this man. Verse 9, he is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you're his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? That's very, very important. Let's finish out. We'll go back up to verse 9. And as she spoke this to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. One day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men were in the house, she caught him by the garment, saying, lie with me. He left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon, we'll stop right there. All right, go back up to verse 9. When he said, I can't do this wickedness, how could I? Who does he point to? God. Because integrity is more than just my relationship with you, what you catch me doing, what I'm hiding from you, what I'm doing with you. It's about a higher thing. It's about what God sees me doing, right? Our mothers have always said this. Do the right thing even if nobody's watching, right? That's the idea behind being someone with integrity. I am accountable to God. I might, in a business deal, I might sell you a bad product. You might not know it's bad. I might get away with it. I might make a little bit of extra pocket change. But you know who noticed? God noticed. God noticed. And Joseph in Genesis 39 knew that. He said, this is an issue of integrity. I have trust with this man. He's put me in charge of everything. I only am not supposed to be with you. That's the one thing. I am not going to cross that line because I have a relationship with Potiphar. And I don't want to break that trust. Furthermore, I'm not sinning against Potiphar. I'm not sinning against you. I'm just sinning against God. I'm not doing this wickedness to God because God sees everything. that we are. There is no hiding. Jonah, right? There's no hiding from God. We are what we are. He knows every bit of our lives. So it's having honesty in front of God, not just people, but in front of God. I love that example from Genesis 39. Naboth, 1 Kings. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 21. And I love this example too. 1 Kings chapter 21, Naboth's vineyard. We have Jezebel in this text, and we have Ahab and Naboth. Those are our main characters. Verses 1 through 4, we're going to pillage around through this chapter and get the rest of the context. But starting in verse number 1, now Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab the king of Samaria. And after this, Ahab said to Naboth, "Give me your vineyard, that I might have it for a vegetable garden, because it's near my house, and I will give you," watch this, here's the offer, "I'll give you a better vineyard." Okay, so that's option 1. You can have a better vineyard, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money. Now, the context behind this story that we're not going to see immediately in this text is that Naboth was not supposed to sell this land to anyone. It was not within his power to sell the land. He's going to explain that in the very next verse. Verse 3, Naboth said to Ahab, "The Lord forbid that I should give you an inheritance of my fathers. It's part of my family's inheritance. It's part of my heritage. I'm not going to sell you this land, even if you want to give me a better vineyard." Now, of course, Ahab doesn't like that. Verse number 4, he went to his house. He was vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said. For he said, "I will not give you an inheritance of my fathers." And he lay down on his bed, and he turned away his face and would not eat food. So he pitched a big fit. Now, the rest of this text of chapter 21, Ahab is over there crying about the fact that he can't have this new vegetable garden. Boo-hoo. I know when we don't get our, vineyards that we want, we always cry, right? First world problems, right? But Ahab's over there crying about it. Jezebel comes in. "Why are you crying? What's upsetting you?" "Well, there's this guy Naboth. He has a really good vineyard. I wanted to buy it. He wouldn't sell it to me." And so Jezebel comes up with this plan that, hey, we're just going to kill him. So they set up this big dinner. They have a guy to the right of him, a guy to the left of him. They sit Naboth down, and then all at once these two men stand up and say, "Naboth just cursed against the king and against God. We need to take him out and stone him." And that's what happened. And so then Jezebel runs back to Ahab and says, "I got you a birthday present. Look at this beautiful vineyard. Used to be Naboth's. He's dead." And then the prophet of the Lord comes and says, "Hey, because you did that, you're both going to die." The very next chapter, Ahab dies. And part of that punishment, he says, where Naboth died, the dogs will lick up your blood. The dogs will eat you where Naboth died. Chapter 21, Naboth dies. Chapter 22, Ahab dies. And of course, the prophecy comes true. 2 Kings chapter 9, Jezebel's going to fall out of a window. Same fate. So, in this text, we have both the contrast of integrity and the lack thereof. Of course, there's all sorts of sins that Jezebel was guilty of, but one of the baseline sins is that they didn't purchase this land fairly. Forget about the murder. That's bad in and of itself. But they also went around and tried to get this land that they were not supposed to have. They were not being integral. Of course, Naboth was. But I love this example because Naboth was not willing to sell even if he could get something better for what his investment was. So when it comes down to dollars and cents, he wasn't going to take the better vineyard or a lump sum of money. Daniel chapter 1. We'll look at chapter 6, but I want you to focus on chapter 1. This is one of my favorite stories in the book of Daniel. You got to keep in mind when Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were taken into Babylon, they were young men, probably around the age of 17, give or take. And we've talked about this in the past pretty extensively. But what they would do when they would try to conquer people is they would take out some of the young people and they would try to indoctrinate them. They'd try to brainwash them. And then when it was time to take the rest of the people, they'd come in and they'd have kind of like spies. They'd have people already, the pump had already been primed. And so the king brings in all these youths, and he's really treating them right in chapter 1. He's letting them eat the king's food. They've got a nice place to sleep, and they're getting good education. They're not being beaten. Now, they are enslaved, but they're not being beaten. They're not being, forced to do labor. They're living the high life in hopes of indoctrinating these young men. But Daniel, in his young age, has a lot of wisdom. Look at verse number 8. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. He would not defile himself with what? The king's food or with the wine that he drank. Didn't want any part of it. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him to not defile himself, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Now the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear that the Lord my king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths that are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. If he comes in here and notices that you haven't been eating, I'm going to take the blame for it. Verse 11, then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over him, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given just vegetables, just water. Let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed, and deal with your servants accordingly what you see to do. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were in better appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Now we're going to stop right there. We're not going to finish out the rest of the chapter. I think I had on there that we were going to finish the rest of the chapter. It's a little bit of a lengthy read. But you get the point, is that this young man was given the opportunity to have whatever he wanted, whatever the king had to offer, and he decided of his own accord that he wasn't going to defile himself, a.k.a. integrity. The book of Daniel is filled with integrity. In this chapter, in chapter 3, the fiery furnace, in chapter 6, when you get to the lion's den, each example is all about integrity. It's doing the right thing when nobody else is. There's a large group of young men, all now shipped into Babylon, and seemingly the only 3 that decide not to sit there and have a Thanksgiving meal, only 4, is Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In chapter 3, you have an entire nation bowing down to an idol, and seemingly the only 3 that don't, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Chapter 6, you have an entire nation banned from praying for, a period of time. Who's praying? Daniel. Integrity is doing the right thing no matter what's going on around me, no matter what my circumstances are. Why? Because just like Joseph said, it's bigger. It's bigger than what you see me doing. It's about what I'm doing with God. God is the one who takes the brunt of my wickedness. All right. And I think I have one more here. Two more. Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 26, it talks about Moses' upbringing. We understand he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, but he chose to suffer with the Hebrews instead of being called Pharaoh's grandson, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So that's the example there. Now, let's go over to 1 Peter. We will end this point on 1 Peter chapter 2. We do have another slide, so I'm trying to not rush, but get through it. 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse number 13, going through verse 21. 21. And we had actually talked about this on Sunday, but I wanted to read this in full context. Be subject, verse number 13, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors, sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Now, watch verse 18 and following. Servants, Be subject to your masters with all respect, but not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? So if you did something wrong and you get punished, who cares? But if when you do good and you suffer for it, you're expecting to be paid back good, you're expecting something good in return, but if you end up suffering for it and you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. Verse 21. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. The point I wanted to make behind this is that integrity does not look for something in return. It is not doing good to get a pat on the back. I don't know how many of you are on social media. I really am not on social media other than football and a couple memes. But what is very popular in this day and age is to do something good, but to record it and put it on, TikTok or Instagram, where millions of people can see it and give you praise. Oh, that's so nice. It's disgusting is really what it is. Some of the biggest and best workers for the church will never get a lick of recognition. They will never get any recognition. There are so many people working behind the scenes at this congregation and congregations across the country that their work goes unnoticed a lot of times. But it is crucial to the function and the success of the Lord's church. I can think of plenty of people. I won't say any names off the top of my head because I don't want to embarrass somebody, and make an example out of somebody. But there's a lot going on in the church that you really need to understand that you're not always going to get a pat on the back. But that's not the point. Doing good is our job, regardless of how we're being treated or what kind of recognition we get. Yes, ma'am.
Integrity goes along with humility, which is what you just said. And we have to remember that our reward for that is that as we become more humble and have more integrity, we become stronger Christians. And that's our real reward, because we're able to face harder things that are going to come along in our lives.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Another thing along these same lines of, humility and integrity, and we're going to add into that work ethic, throw all those things in a big pot together. Some of the hardest working people I've ever met are missionaries. Nobody's checking on them a lot of times. A lot of times I'll go to another country and, what did you do today? Well, I got up, I went to Starbucks, went to the gym, I went to work, I picked the kids up from school, I did this. What did they do today? Well, they traveled 5 hours in the back of a beat-up truck. They're in a village talking to some Muslims right now, and if it doesn't go very well, they might be chased out of the village with machetes. It's like, that's their daily grind in a lot of countries. And what we see from the stateside is they come in and they give a report, they have a few pictures, we say good job, we shake their hands, we say, did somebody invite you to lunch already? All right, well, we'll see you next year or whatever, and we don't think about it. And they are some of the hardest working people, and a lot of their work goes completely unappreciated. In the local congregation, there are so many ladies that are doing so much, whether it's writing cards or meals for people, just visiting the sick, or there's always people that are going to go without a pat on the back. But part of being integrity-based is understanding that I'm doing good not for me. I'm not doing good just for you. I'm doing good for God. It's my responsibility to God. In the case of Daniel, nobody cared. All the men that traveled with him to Babylon, none of them cared what he ate. But he wasn't going to defile himself. Naboth could have got more for his vineyard. Joseph could have done whatever he wanted with Potiphar's wife. Moses could have had a comfortable life with Pharaoh's daughter. And of course, Jesus, when he was reviled, he reviled not again. Jesus didn't get anything from being here. We understand that? That Jesus had everything already. Yes, sir.
Another thing about the two things, that was my first definition, one we just hit, is how you treat someone who can never repay you for that.
Mm.
It's easy to be good to someone who's going to let you borrow their saw tomorrow or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle goodness to people who cannot ever repay you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking about, you said it again in Daniel, this is not a quality you're born with, or you have or you don't. It's something we strive for. And Daniel said, before he read what he did, he said he purposed in his heart. He made his mind up. And then that led to his action. In Proverbs 4, Abraham Lincoln kind of paraphrased that. But you're supposed to look at what's around you, choose the right course, and then doggedly step out on it and don't ever move.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of things there that you have to be thoughtful about this. And you're just not going to know how to be a person of integrity. You do see how you should do it, but are you willing to learn it, think about it, and do it? It's not just going to happen because you read your Bible all the time. You've got to make that purpose in your mind and in your heart that you're going to be obedient.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what it is not just a good idea or a calling, it's a quality of what a Christian is. So I think that means we should be people of integrity.
But just like any Christian grace, you have to work at it. Add to. And integrity is something that is built over time, like you were saying. It's not just, it is a choice. It was Daniel's choice. He had to choose to be a person of integrity, and it doesn't always come natural. Everybody's, I do insurance, on the side. I've done that for years. I've been an insurance adjuster. And one thing you learn very quickly, because we have to take a lot of classes on ethics and, integrity because of insurance fraud. You add money into the mixture, and a lot of people, no matter how sweet they are and honest they are, you really see the worst of some people when it comes to adding something alluring into the mix. So integrity is something that has to be continually honed and sharpened over time. But where does that integrity stem from? Well, for us, for children of God, we should have the understanding that I'm doing good for God, for my relationship with God, for my standing with God. I know there's a whole nother slide that we haven't gotten to, but do we have any questions or comments before we cut it off here? I really appreciate it, and I guess we'll pick up next Wednesday and talk about a life without integrity. But thank you so much for your time.